It was powerful, efficient, and packed with German engineering. But behind the roar of Volkswagen's 3-liter V6 diesel was a secret they didn't want you to know. Banned in the US and tainted by scandal worldwide, this engine didn't just bend the rules, it broke them. Here's the shocking truth behind the Amarok's most infamous engine. At first glance, the 3-liter V6 TDI engine offered by Volkswagen looked like a diesel engineering marvel. Powerful, fuel-efficient, and refined, it was the heart of a variety of premium vehicles, from the rugged Amarok pickup to upscale SUVs like the Audi Q7 and Porsche Cayenne. But behind the curtain, a disturbing truth lurked. A truth that would ultimately turn this engine into one of the most notorious symbols of corporate deception in modern automotive history. The scandal broke in 2015 when the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, announced that Volkswagen had been cheating emissions regulations. While early reports focused on VW's 2-liter TDI engines, a deeper investigation uncovered that the issue wasn't limited to just one power plant. By November 2015, Volkswagen formally admitted that its 3-liter V6 diesel engines, sold under the VW, Audi, and Porsche brands, also contained illegal software designed to manipulate emissions results during testing. This so-called defeat device was a sophisticated algorithm embedded into the engine control unit. It could detect when the vehicle was undergoing an emissions test based on a combination of factors, like steering wheel position, speed, barometric pressure, and duration of operation. During these specific test scenarios, the vehicle would fully activate its emissions control systems, including the exhaust gas recirculation, EGR system, and selective catalytic reduction, SCR, to meet nitrogen oxide, NOx, limits required by law. However, in real-world driving conditions, when the vehicle wasn't under test, the software would scale back or completely disable these systems. The result? Nitrogen oxide emissions that were up to 9 times higher than the legal limit in the United States. A staggering difference, especially given the fact that NOx emissions are a major contributor to respiratory illnesses, smog formation, and environmental degradation. What made the situation even more disturbing was the deliberate nature of the deception. This wasn't a bug. It wasn't a mistake in the code. It was a calculated, multi-year strategy that involved engineers, legal teams, and executives, all working to skirt environmental regulations while continuing to market their diesel engines as clean alternatives to gasoline. And the V6 engines weren't obscure outliers. They powered over 85,000 vehicles in the US alone, and thousands more globally. These vehicles were sold with full certification that they met the toughest emission standards, including California's stringent Tier 2 Bin 5 standard. But that certification was based on fraudulent testing. Tests that the vehicles passed only because they were programmed to cheat. The EPA and California Air Resources Board, CARB, were misled for years until independent researchers and academics from West Virginia University first raised red flags by performing their own real-world emissions tests. Their findings didn't match the official numbers, and the scandal began to unravel. Once the news broke, regulators, environmental groups, and consumers were outraged. The violation wasn't just technical, it was a massive breach of public trust. Volkswagen had spent years promoting its TDI engines as the perfect blend of performance and eco-friendliness. The 3-liter V6, in particular, was marketed as the refined, torquey alternative to thirsty gasoline V8s, a green badge of honor for the environmentally conscious driver who didn't want to compromise on power. But in truth, it was all a lie. Not only did the engines spew illegal levels of pollution into the air, but the company had also profited handsomely by cutting corners on emissions hardware. Fully compliant diesel systems are expensive. They require urea injection, advanced catalytic converters, and real-time monitoring. By partially disabling or limiting the use of these systems under most driving conditions, VW could reduce maintenance issues, improve fuel economy numbers, and increase performance, all at the expense of environmental safety. Eventually, the fallout was catastrophic. Volkswagen faced billions in fines, lawsuits from consumers and governments, criminal charges for executives, and a brutal public relations nightmare. The company was forced to buy back thousands of affected vehicles in the U.S., update the emission software, and commit billions to clean energy research as part of the settlement agreements. But perhaps most notably, the scandal permanently altered the diesel landscape. Once hailed as the future of clean motoring, diesel engines became a pariah, and the VW Group, once the champion of diesel technology, began rapidly pivoting toward electrification. Production of diesel passenger vehicles was scaled back or eliminated altogether in many markets, and regulations across the globe tightened in response. The fallout from the Volkswagen 3-liter V6 diesel emissions scandal didn't stop at the borders of the United States. Once regulators confirmed that the cheat device wasn't confined to the 2-liter engines and that the more powerful 3-liter V6 TDI was also compromised, the global reaction was swift, fierce, and far-reaching. What started as a U.S. regulatory investigation quickly transformed into an international reckoning that sent shockwaves through governments, consumer markets, and the very foundation of diesel engineering across continents. In the U.S., the discovery of the cheating software in the 3-liter V6 was a bombshell. Vehicles affected included high-end models such as the Volkswagen Touareg, Audi A6, A7, A8, Q5 and Q7, and the Porsche Cayenne diesel. These were not economy cars. These were luxury and performance-oriented vehicles that commanded a premium price tag and were marked as both clean and capable. As soon as the EPA and CARB confirmed the presence of defeat devices in these vehicles, the legal hammer came down. Volkswagen was forced into a second wave of legal battles, in addition to the already massive penalties stemming from the 2-liter engine scandal. The U.S. Department of Justice announced additional lawsuits, and ultimately, VW reached a staggering $4.3 billion criminal and civil settlement. As part of the agreement, VW pleaded guilty to 3 felony counts, including conspiracy to defraud the U.S. government, obstruction of justice, and use of false statements. Several high-ranking executives were charged, and some were even extradited or arrested abroad. One former VW executive, Oliver Schmidt, was sentenced to 7 years in prison for his role in covering up the fraud. Additionally, Volkswagen was ordered to buy back or fix tens of thousands of 3-liter V6 vehicles, extend warranties, and offer compensation payments to affected customers. The total bill for Dieselgate in the U.S., including 2-liter and 3-liter engines, ballooned to over $30 billion, making it the costliest corporate scandal in automotive history. In Brazil, the impact of the scandal hit closer to home, literally. Unlike the U.S., where the Amarok was never sold, Volkswagen Brazil offered the Amarok pickup with the very same 3-liter V6 TDI engine. Between 2011 and 2012, approximately 17,000 Amaroks were found to be equipped with the illegal software. Brazilian authorities launched their own investigations, and the result was clear. Volkswagen had misled both regulators and consumers by selling vehicles that appeared to comply with emission standards, but in reality polluted far more than permitted. A court ruling found Volkswagen guilty of violating consumer rights and environmental regulations. The company was ordered to pay $1 billion, approximately $200 million in damages, including $50 million to a national consumer protection fund, and the rest distributed as compensation to individual Amarok owners. In Europe, Volkswagen's home turf, the scandal sparked one of the most intense political and regulatory shakeups in the EU's history. The European Union had long been accused of being too lenient on diesel vehicles, relying heavily on lab testing instead of real-world driving data. Dieselgate forced a reckoning. Countries like Germany, France, and the UK began conducting independent emissions testing. They found that just like in the US, the 3-liter V6 and other engines emitted NOx far above legal limits during actual driving. Consumer advocacy groups filed lawsuits. Cities began banning older diesel vehicles. Car makers across Europe were forced to recall and retrofit engines. More importantly, Dieselgate changed the entire regulatory framework. The EU introduced real driving emissions, RDE testing, which required vehicles to meet emission standards under real-world conditions, not just in a lab. The worldwide harmonized light vehicles test procedure also replaced the outdated NEDC testing cycle, providing more accurate fuel consumption and emissions data. In the end, the global repercussions of the 3-liter V6 TDI scandal extended far beyond a few buybacks and fines. It led to legal reforms, executive arrests, consumer disillusionment, and a massive shift in how the world views diesel engines. All of it traces back to an engine that, on paper, looked like a masterpiece, but in reality was a rolling monument to corporate dishonesty. Even outside of the emissions scandal, the 3-liter V6 TDI wasn't exactly trouble-free. In regions where the engine continued to be sold, including parts of Europe, Australia, and South America, owners began reporting frustrating issues with the diesel particulate filter, DPF, especially on the Amarok. The problem? The DPF system, designed to trap soot and burn it off during highway driving, struggled in urban or short-distance use, which was ironically how many owners used their Amaroks. When regeneration failed to happen often enough, the DPF would clog, triggering limp mode, warning lights, and expensive repair bills. Add to that the sensitive exhaust gas recirculation valve and NOx sensors prone to failure, and you had a truck that felt like a ticking time bomb if not driven under just the right conditions. For a diesel workhorse, the Amarok V6 ended up being surprisingly high maintenance, and many owners were caught off guard by the steep costs tied to emissions-related components. While Volkswagen did attempt software updates and service campaigns, it only partly addressed the issues. In markets like Australia, forums filled with frustrated Amarok V6 owners dealing with repeat DPF failures, sometimes within the first 50,000 kilometers. A diesel legend tainted by deception. On paper, the VW 3-liter V6 TDI was everything diesel fans wanted. Strong torque, smooth power delivery, and impressive efficiency. In the Amarok, it gave Volkswagen a true rival to the Ford Ranger and the Toyota Hilux, at least in terms of performance. But under the hood was more than just engineering. There was deception. There were shortcuts. And eventually, there was scandal. From billion-dollar fines to global recalls and persistent mechanical headaches, the 3-liter V6 TDI became less of a triumph and more of a cautionary tale. A diesel engine banned in the US, banned from cities in Europe, and burdened by controversy in every market it touched. And while the Amarok powered on for years with that engine internationally, its reputation, much like Volkswagen's, would never be the same. Don't stop following us. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to this channel for more of our videos. See you in the next one.